Hello everyone, welcome to today's new video on the 27th of April of 2023. So today we're gonna look at the semiconductor market and look at the main players, the key players in terms of designing and also to some degree manufacturing in terms of Intel. So the main players in this video will be AMD, Intel and Nvidia. So let's get straight into it. As you see on this graph, this is the revenue of each company in the past few years. I think the axis starts on the left from 2009, and that's actually where you see that back then Intel was just so much bigger force than both AMD and Nvidia. And to be honest, they still are, but the difference between the two smaller companies and Intel is decreasing for every single year that goes. And it's also quite interesting to see that both Nvidia and AMD are growing on a longer perspective quite similarly, but there's obviously differences. As you see in 2018, Nvidia's revenue is double than AMD's, and then AMD all of a sudden just catches up. Obviously this jump here is partly due to the purchase of Xilinx, but also that's not only the whole explanation. So the main question is why would you invest in any of these companies, and also if you would try to venture into this area, should you pick a winner? Could it possibly be multiple winners, or yeah, how would you deal with it basically? And in my opinion, if we are looking at the expected growth of the semiconductor market, so basically look at this research, and you will obviously find many similar research papers that point to the same thing. We will see a steady growth from somewhere around just below 500 billion to close to 800 billion. And to be honest, in my view, this could possibly be conservative, so maybe we are talking very close to 1 trillion by end of the decade. So where is this growth coming from? Well, this is obviously the GPU side of the things, the CPU side, the memory side, and then you can basically go on in all the nuances, but this paper has a few specifics in regards to obviously the new fancy terminology when it comes to AI, especially if you look at the ChatGPT thing that catches everyone's eye, and we all know how data intensive that is. And this is good for these kind of companies. Like, the more data you need to handle, the more CPU power you need, the more GPU power you need. If you want to look at the trends in different kind of data sets, obviously then the GPU are quite interesting. But also just in terms of storage, like imagine you're watching a video on YouTube and you're going like in the last few years from like 720p to 1080p, and then you got to 4K, probably 8K in the future. So these data sets are getting bigger and bigger, and obviously the number crunching will be done by more intelligent and faster CPUs. So this is the scope of the video, basically. Which one of these companies are best positioned, and also this could, by the end of the video, we could end up in a position where we could say, okay, maybe all three of them are in a good position, maybe two of them or none of them. So yeah, let's explore the market. So going back to just look at the stocks for today, and as you can see, the 52-week range, Nvidia is very close to their top, not so about Intel, and AMD is kind of in between. And if we have a look at the market cap of each company, you'll see that Nvidia is actually larger than those other two combined. And this is, I think, a shock to most of the viewers, is because if you go back to the revenue side of things, you'll see that Intel is still more than twice the size of Nvidia in terms of revenue, but somehow the market is still valuing them much less in terms of price to sale ratio. So how could that be? Well, I mean, one main explanation is actually the simple fact of gross margin. So let's look at this here, gross margin. Look at the development in the last few years here. So again, Intel is on the green. So if we start from, let's say, half a decade ago, like a bit more in 2015, AMD is way down, 27% gross margin. Nvidia is still below Intel. But as these last 5, 6, 7, 8 years goes by, the biggest increase is obviously AMD. You just see them like they're just like a rocket ship. And then you got Nvidia that steadily basically changed the top spot with Intel, but then you have this absolute like disaster at Intel. Look at this. They're going like from 50, 60 to 50 to now, like, yeah, they're below AMD, and everything points to the fact that in the near future they will go even further down. So I think, I mean, obviously this is not good. Like, you know, your revenue is going down and your gross margin is just taking a nosedive. So bad news. Whereas the other two companies are actually increasing, and in terms of AMD, I think like they are basically skyrocketing. So this is also probably one of the reasons why Intel is doing so bad. Let's go back to Yahoo Finance. You'll see here basically at Intel here. Look at it, like 47. And if you actually look closer at the stock, so in the past 5 years, if you bought the company in April of 2018, you basically lost more than $20 on the stock. So it's almost halved from there. Now let's go to AMD. On the same time span of the 5 years, the stock was at just above 10, let's say 11. And despite the sharp dive in the past 18 months, you still see that, yeah, I mean, if you bought in 2018, you made more than 8 times your money. And then go back to Nvidia. So let's see what Nvidia. So in the past 5 years, again the same time span, Nvidia is going from 60 to 270. So yeah, I guess in the between of the three companies, which actually, to be honest, looking at this data here, I think is fair value, because AMD is the biggest increase in gross margin in terms of percentage. Nvidia is increasing steadily, although I think like this last year is quite, yeah, you know, the market is different in the last year, but and obviously no one wants to pay for a company that reduces their revenue and then gross margin so fast as Intel. And this is big red flag. Now, on the positive note, Intel is the only company of these three that actually has in-house manufacturing. They have their own fabs. They have, and I believe that given the rumors coming out from the industry, I think like the worst is almost done for in terms of this nightmare in the past like decade with Intel stagnating and the 10 nanometer process just going from bad to worse. And I think at some point they were like on 10 nanometer plus, whereas Nvidia and AMD were using external fabs from Samsung or for example mainly Taiwan Semiconductor, but also in AMD's case they were using the global foundries, which we will come back to in a later video. So I think this is a strategic advantage to Nvidia and AMD in the past at least half a decade, but there seems to be some sign of struggle at TSMC lately, and also Intel, at least if you listen to the CEO, Pat Gelsinger, seems to be catching up. At least that's what they believe. Obviously we have to see like facts. We have to see like good CPUs coming out from Intel with good yields, and that's when we will see a reversal on this really dangerous trend. But at the moment I think Intel, in my mind, is yet to hit the valley or like the bottom in terms of revenue decrease and gross margin loss. But I think maybe somewhere in 2025 maybe we will see a trend reversal, a big trend reversal, especially with the Intel 20 angstrom and 18 angstroms. And also I think like if you scope it and zoom out a bit, and I think Nvidia maybe is a bit too overvalued, simply because they are the main drivers in if you look at their last design last quarter earnings from I think in February, look at these numbers. So they have been steadily increasing their data center numbers. Let's go back here and see. Sorry for the delay. Yeah, so look at this data here. So the data center has been increasingly very fast, which is good. And also this is, I mean, especially on the GPU side of the data centers, very good. There's still way room to grow. But I'm thinking like, you know, the bread and butter for Nvidia ever since they started, the gaming side, they have such a big market share in the market, so there's simply no place to grow. Whereas in AMD's case, especially on the GPU side, they still have to take some market share, and with the new products, with Arduino 3 and especially Arduino 4 with the chiplet designs, you know, the Arduino 3 is the first generation of the chiplet design, but going into 2025 with the Arduino 4 and so on, I think they are really positioning themselves for a good in terms of margins and yields compared to Nvidia, which is more doing a more traditional way of monolithic designs, but yeah, that is more harmful to the yield and to, in the long run, I believe, the financial side of things. I think AMD is taking the more technologically difficult but also rewarding road. So for the moment, not to do an extremely long video, I think if it's up to me, I think between these companies, in my view, AMD is the best bet, because they have room to grow their gross margin, they have room to grow their revenue, and they are steadily doing that, and they keep actually fighting both Intel and Nvidia in both the CPU and the GPU market, and they are really taking market share in the server space, which is basically the bread and butter of Intel. And this fight between Intel and AMD on the server side is one of the main reasons why Intel has been basically losing this revenue. And I think this will continue, and we might never see the times where Intel was just dominating the servers on the CPU side as they did in, let's say, mid 2010s or early 2010s to mid 2010s. And yeah, so in my honest point of view, I think like although Nvidia is a bit more sophisticated in terms of the software side of GPUs, still it doesn't make sense to have this kind of like just X amount of market share, market capitalization compared to the other two. So I think that if Nvidia is basically priced for perfection, the other two are not. And you could also make an argument for Intel. Let's look at this data here. So Intel is currently around 15 times earnings or yearly earnings on a PE ratio basis. And in my view, this obviously the earnings will decrease in the coming years, at least in the coming year. So the PE ratio either goes down or I think it will go down. So the stock has also to go follow it down, especially in this kind of challenging markets. AMD is not cheaply priced, to be honest. So just because I think it's the best option of those three, I don't think it's a cheap stock, especially not now. I mean, sure, the PE ratio is a bit misleading due to one-time cost writings in the last earnings, but I think still, like looking at just like this intense pace where they increase their revenue by like 20, 30, 40% at times, and their EPS growth sometimes close to 100% a year. These will basically eat up into the PE ratio and making it look much cheaper in the future. And yeah, but just to summarize, I think, to be honest, I think like if you have a time clock and basically fast forward to 2030, I still think all three companies will thrive. But if you hold a gun to my head and say which one do you believe is positioning itself for the best, like going from 2020 to 2030s, I think definitely it's gonna be AMD. But I think also like Intel is probably gonna have a trend reversal mid-decades, and Nvidia maybe will lose a bit of relative strength compared to the other two, but still will be a very important player. So yeah, thank you for your time, and I will keep continue making new videos, and please like the video and subscribe. See you later.